supposed to be another one of Trump's big wins. Another chance to bluster into the spotlight, declare victory before even negotiating, and strong-arm America's allies with the swagger of a man who thinks bluffs and bankruptcies are the same thing as diplomacy. But this time, the bluff was called. Loudly, firmly, and in true Canadian fashion, strategic, quiet, and devastatingly effective.
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
Let's be clear. Trump thought Canada would roll over. He thought Mark Carney, economist, technocrat, diplomat, would fold under pressure the way Wall Street cronies do behind closed doors. But Carney isn't some loudmouth sycophant chasing a cabinet appointment. He's a statesman, a thinker, a man whose understanding of global markets runs circles around Trump's ego-fueled chaos. So when Trump tried to bully Canada over the digital services tax, what he got wasn't submission. It was a mirror held up to expose just how weak and outdated his entire economic playbook has become. Because here's the truth. Canada's 3% digital levy wasn't an attack. It was a correction. For years, American tech giants have extracted billions from Canadian consumers while parking profits offshore and paying next to nothing in taxes. The DST is not revenge, it's common sense. It's about fairness, equity. It's about government standing up to corporations that treat countries like playgrounds and citizens like wallets. And yet, Trump exploded. Not because he cares about fairness or even the companies involved. No, Trump melted down because the move punctured his myth that America can dictate terms of the world while breaking every rule in the book. It showed that leadership isn't about theatrics. It's about consequences. Let's talk about those consequences. Trump's knee-jerk retaliation, canceling negotiations, threatening tariffs on Canadian dairy, aluminum, and lumber, didn't punish Carney. It punished American farmers. It hurt U.S. consumers. It sent prices surging in border states where cross-border trade isn't a luxury, it's life. And while Carney doubled down on building trade bridges with Europe, Asia, and Africa, Trump kept lighting matches, hoping to look strong while setting his own house on fire. What did Canada do? They didn't shout. They didn't tweet. They strategized. Carney and his cabinet knew exactly what strings to pull, quietly tightening export controls, redirecting pork and grain shipments to Asia, launching legal frameworks to protect digital sovereignty. Every move was measured, every word was calculated, and every Canadian policy reinforced a clear message. You can't shake us down. You can't threaten us into silence. You won't control the rules anymore. And as Trump kept ranting about ungrateful Canada and digital theft, Carney went on national television and laid it out clearly. We believe in free markets, but free markets require fair rules. If the U.S. chooses to walk away from fairness, Canada will walk toward partnerships that respect it. That wasn't just diplomacy. It was a warning. Because while Trump was busy placating Silicon Valley billionaires, Carney was building a future. He's ramping up funding for Canadian AI development. He's inviting European tech regulators to Ottawa. He's pushing legislation that ensures Canadian data stays on Canadian soil, making it harder for companies like Meta and Amazon to exploit Canadian users without accountability. He's not just reacting to Trump. He's outpacing him. Let's zoom in on the digital tax itself. Unlike Trump's clumsy tariffs that blanket entire industries, Canada's DST is surgical. It targets revenue generated from digital advertising and user data harvested in Canada. No revenue? No tax. No operations in Canada? No tax. But if you're making billions from Canadian users while routing profits through Bermuda, you bet you're paying your share now. That's why the tech giants are terrified, not just of the money they'll lose, but the precedent being set. If Canada can do this, so can Germany, France, Japan, Brazil. The DST is the first domino in a global effort to make tech companies accountable to the people they profit from. And Trump's tantrum only draws more attention to the fact that he's siding with corporations, not citizens. Meanwhile, small Canadian businesses, real job creators, are praising the move. Why? Because for once, the playing field is leveling. For years, Local startups had to compete against American giants that operated tax-free. Now, with the DST in place, there's a little more room to breathe, innovate, and grow. That's what economic sovereignty looks like. That's what leadership looks like. And what does Trump offer in return? More tariffs, more lawsuits, more chaos. His administration is even floating the idea of banning Canadian software from U.S. government systems. A desperate, bizarre attempt to retaliate that only exposes how little strategy is left in Washington. And all the while, U.S. families are paying more at the grocery store, more for building materials, more for goods that use the flow freely across a peaceful border. Let's not forget the tourism fallout. In border towns like Buffalo, Detroit, and Spokane, hotel occupancy is down. Retail foot traffic is shrinking. Canadian tourists, once a lifeline for local economies, are choosing Europe or domestic travel instead. Why spend hard-earned loonies in a country that treats your nation like a doormat? Trump doesn't care. He's too busy declaring victory from a golf course while quietly watching court battles pile up and economic indicators flash red. His trade war didn't bring manufacturing back. It brought confusion, cost spikes, and fractured relationships that will take years to repair, if they ever are. Meanwhile, Mark Carney isn't looking for a fight. He's looking for permanence. His administration is investing in infrastructure, digitizing customs processes, and tightening rules around cross-border corporate loopholes. He's treating trade like what it is, a long game that requires trust, stability, and cooperation. Canada is no longer waiting for America to grow up. It's building around the dysfunction. While Trump keeps trying to make every problem a headline, Carney is crafting policy designed to last beyond the next election cycle. That's the difference. That's why Carney is gaining respect globally while Trump is losing it, even among former allies. So here we are. A small tax on digital ads became a turning point. It exposed a hollow empire built on intimidation, now being eclipsed by quiet resilience. Trump wanted a trade victory. What he got was a reckoning. What he unleashed was a new kind of resistance, not loud, not flashy, but deeply effective. This isn't just about taxes. It's about sovereignty. It's about accountability. It's about refusing to be bullied by a fading strongman whose every move reeks of desperation. Trump wanted to test Canada's resolve. Carney responded with a masterclass in leadership. And while Trump flails, Canada builds. While Trump blames, Carney prepares. While Trump shouts about being cheated, Canada enforces rules. And every business leader, policymaker, and investor watching this unfold sees the same thing. One leader is trying to control the past. The other is building the future. Welcome to the new trade order. It's thoughtful, it's principled, and it doesn't answer to Trump anymore. Trump thought Canada would break. He thought that with a few tweets and a couple of threats, the entire Canadian government would collapse like a poorly constructed Trump Tower. But instead, what he got was a reality check, one that shattered the illusion of American trade invincibility and exposed the hollow chest-thumping bravado that's defined his presidency. Because here's the truth. Mark Carney didn't just stand up to Trump. He outmaneuvered him, outflanked him, and most importantly, he did it without ever lowering himself to Trump's carnival of insults and bombast. While Trump pouted about unfair taxes and Canadian betrayal, Carney was 2 steps ahead, locking down bilateral deals with the EU, strengthening Canada's role in the CPTPP, and advancing digital tax harmonization with allies fed up with American tech monopolies hiding behind Washington's protectionist shield. Let's be clear, this isn't just about Canada collecting its fair share from Google or Meta. This is about a sovereign nation refusing to be bullied by a man whose understanding of trade policy is barely skin deep. Trump thinks tariffs are a sign of strength, but in the real world, they're a confession of failure, a desperate move when you can't negotiate, can't compromise, and can't lead. And Canadians? They noticed. The DST wasn't some fringe policy debated in Ottawa ivory towers. It became a national rallying cry. Citizens from British Columbia to Nova Scotia backed it as a line in the sand, proof that Canada would no longer let foreign tech giants suck billions out of their economy tax-free while dodging regulations and ducking accountability. The message was simple. If you profit off Canadians, you pay your fair share. But Trump couldn't handle that. His response? Tariffs on Canadian maple syrup, wine, and even baby formula. You read that right. In a fit of ego-fueled rage, he slapped duties on infant nutrition because nothing says strong leadership like driving up the price of baby food during a cost-of-living crisis. And yet, despite the chaos, Carney held his ground. No panic, no tweet storms, just steady governance. His administration rolled out relief for affected exporters, coordinated supply chain adjustments, and doubled down on talks with trading partners in Asia and Latin America. Where Trump saw enemies, Carney saw opportunity. Where Trump burned bridges, Carney built new ones. And the results speak volumes. Within months of the DST fallout, Canadian exports to Germany, South Korea, and Australia surged. Investment in Canadian tech startups hit a record high. And global policymakers began referencing the Carney Doctrine, a model of how mid-sized economies can assert themselves against economic giants without resorting to nationalism or capitulation. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Trump floundered. His own Commerce Department quietly released reports showing tariff-induced inflation was hammering middle-income Americans. Construction companies complained about lumber shortages. Retailers warned of rising import costs. And still, Trump bragged about how we're winning, while U.S. firms quietly started lobbying Congress for exemptions, carve-outs, and relief. That's the tragedy of Trumpism in trade. It's never about outcomes. It's about optics. It's about yelling America first, while America's actual interests come last. Because for Trump, trade isn't a strategy. It's a performance, a daily spectacle where headlines matter more than results, and loyalists are rewarded for cheering louder, not thinking smarter. And all the while, Carney just kept working. He convened roundtables with industry leaders. He expanded Canadian access to clean tech investment and green manufacturing credits. He launched a Digital Fairness Task Force to ensure that the next wave of technological innovation happens in Canada by Canadians for Canadians. His message to the world? Canada is open for business, but it's not open to exploitation. And that scared Trump. Because underneath all the bluster, he knew what was happening. The narrative was slipping. The emperor's robe was torn, and the man standing next to him, quiet, competent, composed, wasn't afraid anymore. Carney wasn't just winning policy battles. He was winning hearts and minds. Even conservative voices in U.S. media started asking the question out loud, why is Canada outmaneuvering us? Editorials that once praised Trump's hardball tactics now questioned why America was hemorrhaging allies while Canada gained them. Business leaders warned of long-term damage to the U.S. reputation, saying that Washington's erratic behavior was scaring off investment, not attracting it. And let's talk about those investors. Carney's stable trade policy, coupled with robust legal frameworks, has made Canada one of the safest destinations for international capital. Venture funds are relocating offices to Toronto. Green energy companies are setting up in Alberta. Even AI labs are leaving Silicon Valley to escape Trump's regulatory chaos and seek predictability in Vancouver. The brain drain, once a Canadian worry, is now an American reality, and Trump's tariffs are a big reason why. But what's truly remarkable is how Carney managed this entire confrontation without alienating the Canadian public. His approval ratings climbed. His economic strategy earned praise across party lines. And his firm yet diplomatic stance toward the U.S. became a blueprint for how smaller nations could push back against bullies without losing their soul. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It wasn't about sticking it to Trump. It was about standing up for Canadians. And that, in the end, is why Trump lost his trade war, not in a courtroom or at a press conference, but in the court of public opinion. Because while he was shouting about betrayal, Mark Carney was showing what real leadership looks like, measured, focused, and unshakable. Trump wanted to punish Canada for daring to demand fairness. Instead, he ended up proving why fairness matters. His tantrums revealed the pettiness. His tariffs revealed the hypocrisy. And his silence, when American consumers started to feel the pain, revealed the truth. This was never about protecting jobs or fighting for workers. It was about ego. It was always about ego. And when the dust settled, it was Canada that stood taller. Not because they won every skirmish, not because they retaliated in kind, but because they never lost their way. They didn't need to. Carney didn't need to scream. He just needed to govern. And in an era defined by chaos, that quiet competence became revolutionary. So as Trump retreats to Mar-a-Lago to sulk and stew and rehash old grievances, Canada moves forward. New trade deals, stronger industries, a population that knows its leaders will fight for them with integrity, not spectacle. The world is watching, and they're taking notes. Canada stood its ground, and the world saw who really leads when the pressure mounts. It's not the one with the loudest voice. It's the one with the clearest vision. Mark Carney didn't just survive Trump's trade war. He rewrote the rules. The turning point wasn't a headline. It wasn't a tariff or a tweet. It was a realization, quiet, undeniable, that Canada no longer needed to ask for respect. It had earned it. For decades, Canada had played the role of the polite neighbor, the good partner, the quiet ally. But Donald Trump's reckless trade policies, his blustering nationalism, and his contempt for diplomacy forced a new chapter. This wasn't about compromise anymore. It was about sovereignty. And Mark Carney was the man who drew the line. When Trump lashed out over Canada's digital services tax, when he accused Carney of trying to cripple American innovation, what he didn't expect was that Canada would not flinch. No apology, no concession, just resolve. Carney stood in front of reporters unshaken and said, if American companies are going to profit from Canadian consumers, they're going to contribute to Canadian society. That's not confrontation. That's fairness. And the message landed. From Regina to Montreal, Canadians rallied behind him, because this wasn't about left or right. It was about pride, a national moment where people realized that diplomacy doesn't mean submission, and that partnership with the United States shouldn't come at the cost of national dignity. Carney tapped into that sentiment with surgical precision, and as Trump fumed and barked and signed executive orders like a man drowning in his own slogans, Carney methodically closed ranks. He strengthened domestic production chains. He initiated a cross-government audit of trade vulnerabilities. He directed emergency supports to farmers hit by U.S. retaliation, while quietly expanding subsidies for tech incubators and digital infrastructure, investments that would pay off long after the tantrums in Washington faded. And the world noticed. European leaders welcomed Carney with standing ovations at economic forums. The African Union praised Canada's role in fair digital trade. Even Pacific nations, long wary of Western heavy-handedness, saw in Carney a model of cooperative strength, an alternative to chaos Trump unleashed with every tariff threat and broken deal. Because while Trump treated trade as a zero-sum game, win or lose, conquer or submit, Carney treated it as a system, a network of interdependence. And he understood that true strength comes from resilience, not domination. And make no mistake, the pain wasn't one-sided. Trump's tariffs boomeranged hard. In Ohio, soybean farmers saw exports plummet. In Michigan, auto manufacturers laid off workers as supply chain costs soared. And in border towns across New York, Vermont, and Minnesota, local economies withered as Canadian tourists stayed home. Americans started asking questions. Why were they paying more for groceries? Why had their factories slowed down? Why were their leaders picking fights with allies? But Trump offered no answers, just more bravado, more empty threats, more declarations that Canada needs us more than we need them, even as economic data showed the opposite. While American exports to Canada dropped, Canadian trade with the EU hit all-time highs. Carney had insulated his country from the chaos. Trump had wrapped his own people in it. And the final straw, a quiet moment, barely noticed in the headlines, but devastating in its symbolism. A Canadian diplomat, speaking at a UN trade summit, said simply, "The United States is no longer a reliable partner in global commerce. We hope that changes." No drama, no insults, just the cold truth. And the room nodded, because by then the world had seen enough. Seen the bluster, the instability, the way Trump weaponized tariffs like a toddler flinging toys in a tantrum. And they'd seen the alternative, Carney, unshaken, unbowed, building bridges as Trump burned them. And here's the kicker. Even as Trump tried to punish Canada, He couldn't stop it, couldn't isolate it, couldn't bully it back into line, because Canada had already moved on. The digital services tax wasn't just a policy, it was a pivot, a signal that Canada would no longer wait for American permission to govern in its own interest. And in doing so, it sparked a revolution. France doubled its own tech tax. India accelerated its push for digital revenue fairness. The G20 reopened stalled negotiations on global taxation. And through it all, Canada stood at the center, not as a victim, not as a follower, but as a leader. And that's what terrified Trump most, because his entire presidency was built on the myth of strength, of dominance, of unilateral control. But here was Carney, proving that real strength lies in alliances, in steadiness, in principle, that you don't need to shout to be heard, that sometimes the most powerful punch is the one you never see coming. Trump saw Canada as weak, as dependent, as a soft target. But when he struck, he hit steel, not just the literal kind, but the moral kind, the economic kind, the kind of strength that comes from a country that knows who it is and refuses to be defined by someone else's rage. And the final irony? Trump's tariffs were meant to make Canada bend. Instead, they made Canada rise. They gave Carney the political capital to push reforms that had been stalled for years. They fueled national investment in green energy, domestic tech, and indigenous infrastructure. They united the country behind a vision of independence not just from Trump, but from the very idea that Canada must always follow where America leads. And in the end, Trump stood alone, isolated, confused, screaming into the void as the world moved forward without him. And Canada? Canada stood tall, because it had learned something Trump never would. That in a world of loud men with small ideas, the real power lies with those who stay calm, stay focused, and stay true to their values, even when the storm is raging. Mark Carney didn't just win a trade dispute. He redefined what leadership looks like in the 21st century. And for Trump, that's the most humiliating defeat of all.